When Kwame Mensah stepped through the gates of his Lagos mansion after 15 years away, he expected to find his son preparing for university. Instead, he found him serving tea to strangers, wearing a houseboy's uniform, sleeping in the servants' quarters. The boy didn't recognize him. He'd forgotten what his father looked like. And nobody, not a single person in that house, had told Kwame the truth about what happened to his child. 15 years earlier, Kwame Mensah was a name that commanded respect across West Africa. He'd built his fortune from nothing, starting with a small palm oil business in rural Ghana and expanding into shipping, real estate, and telecommunications. By the time his son Kofi was 5 years old, Kwame owned the largest shipping company in Lagos, employed over 5,000 people, and had business interests in 12 African countries. His first wife, Abina, was the love of his life. They'd grown up in the same village, attended the same school, dreamed the same dreams. She was a teacher, quiet and intelligent, who believed education could change everything. Their son Kofi was the perfect blend of both parents, his father's determination and his mother's gentleness. But Abina was sick. The cancer came quickly and took her even faster. She died when Kofi was only 5 years old, leaving Kwame devastated and their son confused, constantly asking when Mama would come home. Kwame threw himself into work, traveling constantly, building his empire as a way to escape grief. But traditional pressure mounted. His mother, his uncles, the village elders, they all said the same thing. A man of his status needed a wife. A boy needed a mother. The family name needed to continue. 2 years after Abina's death, Kwame married again. Not for love, but for duty. Her name was Naomi. She came from a prominent Yoruba family in Lagos. Beautiful, sophisticated, educated in London. She knew how to navigate high society, how to host dinner parties for politicians and businessmen, how to make Kwame look even more successful than he already was. What Kwame didn't know was that Naomi had her own son from a previous relationship, a boy named Tund who was the same age as Kofi. She'd hidden this during their courtship, afraid it would ruin her chances. Only after the traditional marriage ceremonies did she introduce Tund, claiming he was her nephew who needed a place to stay. By then, it was too late. Kwame was trapped by tradition and obligation. At first, things seemed manageable. Naomi treated Kofi well enough in front of Kwame. The two boys played together, attended the same expensive private school in Lagos, lived in the mansion like brothers. Kofi, desperate for maternal love after losing his mother, tried hard to please his new stepmother. But Kwame was building an empire. He traveled to South Africa for mining investments, to Kenya for tech ventures, to Ghana for manufacturing plants. He was gone for weeks, sometimes months at a time. He told himself he was securing his son's future, that one day Kofi would inherit everything and understand the sacrifice. What he didn't see was what happened when he left. Naomi's mask dropped the moment Kwame's car pulled out of the compound. She looked at 7-year-old Kofi with cold calculation and saw not a stepson, but an obstacle. Everything Kwame owned would go to this boy. Her own son Tund would get nothing unless she changed the equation. It started small. Kofi's favorite meals stopped being prepared. His clothes weren't washed as carefully. His homework didn't get checked. Meanwhile, Tund received extra tutoring, new toys, constant praise, and attention. Kofi noticed but said nothing. He was a quiet child, still grieving his mother, trying desperately to be good enough that this new mother would love him too. The real shift came when Kofi was 9 years old. Kwame announced he'd be spending 6 months in South Africa to oversee a major mining project. It was too important to delegate. He'd call every week. He'd send money. Everything would be fine. 3 weeks after Kwame left, Naomi made her move. She withdrew Kofi from his private school, telling the administration he'd be studying abroad. She told the household staff that Kofi had behavioral problems and needed discipline. She moved him from his bedroom to a small storage room near the kitchen. She gave him a uniform, the same khaki outfit worn by the houseboys, and a list of chores. "Your father left you in my care," she told him coldly, "and I will raise you the way I see fit. You will learn humility. You will learn what it means to work, and you will stop acting like you're better than everyone else." Kofi tried to protest. "But I'm Kwame Mensah's son. I'm supposed to go to school. Naomi slapped him across the face, the first time anyone had ever struck him. You are whoever I say you are. And right now, you are a houseboy who needs to learn respect. The staff members who'd known Kofi since birth were horrified but terrified. Naomi had already fired 2 workers who'd questioned her authority. The remaining staff had families to feed, children in school, aging parents depending on their salaries. They needed these jobs, so they looked away. Kofi's transformation was swift and brutal. He woke at 5 a.m. to sweep the compound. He washed dishes, cleaned bathrooms, served meals to his stepmother and stepbrother. He carried shopping bags from the market, polished shoes, did laundry by hand. When Kwame called from South Africa, Naomi put Tund on the phone instead, coaching him to call Kwame uncle and give updates about his cousin Kofi, who was doing wonderfully at boarding school. She created fake school reports, forged certificates, even found photos of random students online to send to Kwame as proof of Kofi's progress. Kwame, buried in complex mining negotiations and exhausted from 18-hour workdays, accepted the reports gratefully. His son was safe, getting educated, growing up well. That's what mattered. Meanwhile, Kofi was disappearing. By the time Kofi turned 11, he'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be the son of the house. He moved through the mansion like a ghost, invisible to visitors, barely acknowledged by staff, completely erased from his stepmother's social world. Naomi hosted elaborate parties for Lagos elite. Kofi served drinks and cleared plates, wearing his houseboy uniform, never making eye contact. Guests complimented Naomi on how well-trained her staff was. Some even remarked that one of the houseboys looked vaguely like her husband, laughing at the coincidence. Naomi smiled and said nothing. Tund attended the best schools, wore designer clothes, traveled to London for holidays. He knew exactly what was happening to Kofi, but had been raised by his mother to see it as natural, as deserved. This was his home now, his inheritance. Kofi was just competition that had been neutralized. Sometimes Tund would order Kofi around just to feel powerful. Clean my room better. My shoes aren't shiny enough. Bring my food faster. And Kofi, worn down by years of conditioning, would simply comply. The cruelest part wasn't the work. It was the erasure of identity. Kofi's education stopped at age 9. Everything he learned after that came from secretly reading newspapers left behind by visitors, from listening to conversations he wasn't supposed to hear, from the occasional kindness of a staff member who remembered who he used to be. There was Grace, the elderly cook who'd worked for the family since before Kofi was born. She remembered Abina, remembered baby Kofi, remembered when this house was full of love. She would sneak him extra food, teach him recipes, tell him stories about his mother when no one was listening. There was Samuel, the gardener, who let Kofi work alongside him in the garden, teaching him about plants, about patience, about finding peace in small, beautiful things, even when life was ugly. These tiny acts of humanity kept Kofi's spirit from breaking completely. They reminded him that he was still human, still worthy of kindness, even if the woman who'd promised to be his mother treated him as less than nothing. Kwame's 6-month project in South Africa stretched to 2 years, then 5, then 10. Each time he planned to return home, a new opportunity emerged. A diamond mine in Botswana, a tech startup in Nigeria, an oil partnership in Angola. He was building an empire across the continent, becoming one of Africa's wealthiest men. He sent money regularly. He video called monthly, though Naomi always had excuses why Kofi couldn't come to the phone. He's studying. He's at sports practice. He's sleeping. Kwame accepted these explanations. Teenagers were busy. It was natural, but Kofi wasn't a teenager living a busy life. He was a teenager whose life had been stolen. At 15, Kofi had developed a permanent stoop from years of physical labor. His hands were calloused and scarred. His education had stopped 6 years earlier, though he read whatever he could find, teaching himself, refusing to let his mind atrophy even if his circumstances seemed permanent. He'd learned to survive by becoming invisible, by anticipating needs before they were spoken, by moving through the house like air, necessary but unnoticed. But invisibility has its advantages. People say things around you they'd never say to you. Kofi heard everything. He learned that his father was now worth over $3 billion. He learned about properties he'd never seen, businesses bearing his family name that he had no connection to. He learned that legally, he was still Kwame Mensah's sole heir, that Naomi had been systematically trying to change the will, that lawyers kept refusing because they needed Kwame's consent and Kofi's presence. He also learned something more dangerous. Naomi was getting desperate. She'd spent 15 years building Tun's claim to the fortune, but legally, Kofi's existence threatened everything. Some of her friends, wealthy women who visited for tea, suggested solutions. Boys run away all the time. Accidents happen. There are people who handle such problems. Kofi, serving tea and remaining invisible, heard every word. That night, he made a decision. He was 15 years old, had nothing but the clothes on his back, but he would run. He would find his father somehow. He would tell the truth. He stole 2,000 naira from the household money, enough for transport. He wrote a letter to Grace, thanking her for being kind when no one else was. He packed a small bag with one change of clothes and the only photo he had of his mother, a tiny picture he'd hidden for years. At 3 a.m., Kofi slipped out of the servants' quarters and headed for the gate. Samuel was waiting there, the old gardener who'd taught him about patience and peace. "I knew you'd try eventually," Samuel said quietly. "I'm not going to stop you, but I need you to know something." He handed Kofi a worn envelope. "Your mother gave this to me before she died. She made me promise to give it to you when you needed it most. I think now is that time." Inside was a letter in his mother's handwriting, written when she knew she was dying. "My beloved Kofi, if you're reading this, I am gone, and I pray you are safe and loved. But if you're not, if something has gone wrong, I need you to remember who you are. You are Kofi Mensah, son of Abina and Kwame. You are strong, kind, and worthy of love. Whatever happens, whoever tries to make you forget, hold on to this truth. Your worth is not determined by how others treat you. You are valuable simply because you exist. Find your father. Tell him the truth. He loves you more than business, more than money, more than anything. He just needs to remember that. I love you forever, Mama." Kofi stood at the gate, holding his dead mother's words, and cried for the first time in years. Then Samuel told him something that changed everything. "Your father is coming home. I heard Madam on the phone yesterday. Some business problem brought him back to Lagos. He'll be here in 3 days. 3 days. Kofi could wait 3 more days. He returned to the servants' quarters, hid the letter under his mattress, and made a new plan. He wouldn't run. He would wait. And when his father walked through that door, Kofi would make sure he couldn't be hidden anymore. Kwame Mensah's return to Lagos wasn't triumphant. His telecommunications company had been caught in a massive fraud scandal, embezzlement by a CFO that implicated his entire board. He needed to be on the ground, needed to protect his reputation, needed to salvage his empire. The 15-hour flight from Johannesburg gave him time to think about everything he'd sacrificed for success. He was 52 years old, one of the wealthiest men in Africa, and deeply, profoundly lonely. His son Kofi would be 20 now, probably finishing university, maybe already working. Kwame realized with shame that he didn't know what his son was studying, what he looked like as an adult, what his voice sounded like anymore. He promised himself that once this crisis was resolved, he'd make time. Real time. He'd rebuild the relationship he'd let deteriorate. It wasn't too late. The car dropped him at the mansion gates at 11 p.m. on a Thursday. The compound looked exactly the same, manicured gardens, security lights glowing, the massive house standing like a monument to his success. Kwame used his key and walked in, pulling his suitcase behind him. The entrance hall was dimly lit. He could hear movement from the kitchen, the sound of someone washing dishes. He headed that direction, planning to ask the staff to prepare a room to call Naomi. That's when he saw him, a young man in a khaki houseboy uniform, washing dishes at the sink, his back to the door. Something about his posture, the shape of his shoulders, the way he tilted his head, felt familiar. "Excuse me," Kwame said. "Is Naomi home?" The young man froze. Then slowly, carefully, he turned around. They stared at each other across the kitchen. Kwame saw a thin young man with calloused hands and exhausted eyes. But he also saw, beneath the years and the suffering, his son's face. Abina's gentle features mixed with his own stronger ones. The same scar on the left eyebrow from a childhood fall. The same pattern of freckles. Kofi. The word came out as a whisper. The young man's face showed no relief, no joy, just resignation. As if he'd been waiting for this moment so long that its arrival felt anticlimactic. "Welcome home, sir," Kofi said quietly. "Not father. Not papa, sir." Kwame felt the floor tilt beneath him. His mind tried to reconcile what he was seeing with what he believed to be true. His son was at university. His son was educated, successful, thriving. His son wasn't standing in front of him dressed as a servant, washing dishes at 11 p.m., addressing him as sir. What is this?" Kwame's voice cracked. "What are you doing? Why are you dressed like that? Where's your mother? Where's Naomi?" Before Kofi could answer, Naomi appeared in the doorway, still dressed from an evening event, jewelry glittering. When she saw her husband staring at Kofi, all color drained from her face. "Kwame," she said, voice tight with false brightness. "You didn't tell me you were coming home tonight. Let me explain." "Explain what?" Kwame's voice was dangerously quiet. "Explain why our son is dressed as a houseboy. Explain why he just called me sir. Explain why he's not at university where you told me he was." Naomi's mouth opened and closed. Years of lies, years of careful construction, all collapsing in an instant. Kwame turned back to Kofi. "How long?" "Since I was 9, sir," Kofi said, his voice steady despite the trembling of his hands. "Since 3 weeks after you left for South Africa." The words hit Kwame like physical blows. 11 years. His son had lived like this for 11 years while he'd been building an empire, while he'd been accepting fake reports and forged certificates, while he'd been too busy to visit, too trusting to question. "Tell me everything," Kwame said. "Right now. Everything." Kofi told him everything. The withdrawal from school, the move to the servants' quarters, the years of labor, the fake reports, the systematic erasure of his identity. He told him about the parties where he served drinks to people who'd known him as a child but didn't recognize the quiet houseboy. About his stepbrother enjoying privileges that should have been shared. About overhearing conversations about making him disappear permanently. He showed his father the calloused hands, the scars from accidents while cleaning, the small room near the kitchen where he'd slept for 11 years. Kwame listened in silence, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. With every revelation, his understanding of the past 15 years shattered and reformed. All those business calls where Naomi assured him everything was fine. All those reports of Kofi's academic achievements. All those excuses about why his son couldn't come to the phone. All lies. He'd built a fortune across Africa while his son suffered in silence in his own home. He'd been praised as a business genius while failing at the most basic responsibility of fatherhood. Protecting his child. Naomi tried to explain, to justify. She talked about discipline, about teaching humility, about Kofi needing to understand hard work. The excuses sounded hollow even to her own ears. Kwame called the staff together at 2 a.m. Every single person who worked in that house, drivers, cleaners, cooks, security guards. He stood in the main living room with his son beside him and asked one question. Who knew? The silence was deafening. Then, slowly, Grace the cook stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "We all knew, sir. But Madam said she would fire anyone who told you. We have families, sir. Children in school. We needed our jobs. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." One by one, others admitted the truth. Samuel the gardener, the head housekeeper, the drivers who'd taken Ton to school while Kofi cleaned at home. They'd all known. They'd all stayed silent out of fear. Kwame understood. He didn't blame them, the power dynamics, the economic desperation. These people had been put in an impossible situation. But understanding didn't make it hurt less. Then he turned to Naomi. "Pack your things. You and Ton have until sunrise. After that, security will remove you." Naomi's composure finally cracked. "You can't do this. I'm your wife. We have traditions, procedures." "You're right about traditions," Kwame said coldly. "Traditionally, A woman who harms her husband's child can be cast out without a penny. Traditionally, what you've done would make you an outcast in any decent community. Be grateful I'm giving you anything at all. He turned to his lawyers on the phone, working through the night despite the late hour. By dawn, papers were being drawn up. Divorce proceedings, criminal charges for child abuse, forgery, fraud. Naomi would get a settlement, enough to live on, but nothing more. Tund, who was legally not Kwame's responsibility, would leave with his mother. Naomi and Tund left as the sun rose, their car packed with suitcases, their faces masks of shock and rage. Neither looked back at the mansion. Neither spoke to Kofi. And then Kwame and his son were alone in the big house, with a chasm of 15 years between them and no idea how to bridge it. Kwame wanted to fix everything immediately. That's what he knew how to do: identify problems, throw resources at them, solve them quickly. He wanted to enroll Kofi in the best universities, buy him cars, clothes, everything he'd been denied, take him on trips, introduce him to business partners, make up for lost time with grand gestures. But Kofi didn't want grand gestures. He wanted to be left alone. He needed time to process the fact that his entire life had been upended again, that the father who'd abandoned him had returned, that the years of suffering were over, but the scars remained. "I don't need things," Kofi told his father during their second painful breakfast together. "I don't need money or gifts or compensation. I need to figure out who I am now. Because I'm not the son you left 15 years ago, and I'm not the houseboy I've been for 11 years. I don't know what I am." Kwame, who negotiated billion-dollar deals with ease, had no idea how to respond. So he did something he'd never been good at. He waited. He made himself present without demanding anything in return. He canceled business trips. He cleared his schedule. He sat at the breakfast table every morning, even when neither of them knew what to say. He asked questions and listened to answers. He learned that Kofi loved reading, had educated himself through stolen books and newspapers, that he understood people in ways Kwame never had, could read emotions and motivations with uncanny accuracy, that he spoke fluent Igbo, Yoruba, and Hausa because he'd learned from the diverse household staff, that he could cook, garden, repair almost anything because necessity had taught him. "You're remarkable," Kwame said one evening, watching his son prepare a meal that rivaled any restaurant. "I don't think I ever saw it before. I was so focused on making you fit a mold, on raising you to take over the business, that I never asked who you wanted to be." Kofi stopped stirring the pot and looked at his father. "Do you actually want to know?" "Yes. I want to help people. I spent 11 years watching staff struggle, watching good people work themselves to exhaustion for barely enough money to survive. I want to change that. I want to build something that makes workers' lives better." Kwame listened as his son outlined ideas about fair wages, worker cooperatives, profit-sharing models. These weren't the dreams of a business heir. These were the dreams of someone who'd lived on the other side of privilege and refused to forget it. "Then let's do it," Kwame said. "Let's build something together. Not my empire, not my vision. Something new." 6 months after Kwame's return, father and son launched a foundation dedicated to workers' rights and education across West Africa. They started with Kwame's own companies, implementing radical changes that made other business owners uncomfortable. They raised minimum wages above industry standards. They created profit-sharing programs so workers benefited when companies succeeded. They established free education programs, covering school fees for employees' children from primary school through university. The business community criticized Kwame. They said for those who'd been cruel or indifferent, Kofi did something unexpected. He offered them the same dignity he gave everyone else. He didn't seek revenge. He simply treated them fairly and moved on. "Don't you want them to suffer?" Kwame asked him once. "Don't you want them to feel what you felt?" "No," Kofi said simply. "I want them to do better. Hurt people, but healed people can heal people. I choose healing." But not everyone from Kofi's past was willing to let things go quietly. Naomi, living in a modest apartment in Abuja with her son Tund, had spent months stewing in rage and resentment. She'd lost everything: her status, her wealth, her position in society. And it was all because Kofi had survived, had spoken up, had ruined her perfect plan. She began spreading rumors through Lagos social circles. She claimed Kofi had seduced his father with lies, that she'd treated him well, and he'd fabricated abuse stories for inheritance. She found sympathetic ears among women who viewed Kofi's ascension as a threat to their own manipulation of family structures. The rumors reached the press. Tabloids ran stories. Billionaire's son claims abuse and inheritance grab. Stepmother cast out by lying child. Kofi was devastated. He'd finally begun to heal, to build something meaningful, and now his past was being weaponized against him. He stopped going out, stopped attending foundation events, retreated into himself. Kwame watched his son crumble and felt rage unlike anything he'd experienced. He could have used his wealth and influence to destroy Naomi, to silence her permanently. But that would have proven her point that their family used power to crush dissent. Instead, he did something better. He called a press conference. With Kofi beside him, Kwame stood before dozens of cameras and told the complete truth. He showed documents proving Kofi's withdrawal from school. He presented medical records showing years of physical labor damage to a child's body. He brought forth staff members willing to testify about what they'd witnessed. But most powerfully, he told the truth about his own failure. "I abandoned my son," Kwame said to the cameras, his voice steady despite the emotion. "I chose business over presence. I trusted lies because they were convenient. I failed at the most basic job of a father, protecting my child. My ex-wife's abuse was possible because I created the conditions for it. She is guilty, but so am I." The press conference went viral across Africa. The honest admission of failure, the refusal to play the victim, the acknowledgement that wealth and power don't excuse absence, all of it resonated with millions of people who'd experienced similar abandonment in different forms. Support poured in. Workers across the continent shared their own stories of being treated as invisible. Children of wealthy absent parents talked about being raised by staff while their parents chased success. The conversation shifted from whether Kofi was lying to deeper questions about family, responsibility, and what truly matters. Naomi's narrative collapsed under the weight of truth. The rumors stopped. The tabloids moved on. And Kofi, watching his father take public responsibility, felt something shift inside him. His father hadn't tried to fix this with money or power. He'd fixed it with honesty and humility. "Thank you," Kofi said quietly after the press conference. "For what?" Kwame asked. "For not making me carry this alone. For taking responsibility. For being here." 3 years have passed since Kwame came home and found his son working as a servant. The foundation they built together now operates in 8 African countries, has helped over 50,000 workers gain education and fair wages, and has inspired labor reforms across the continent. Kofi is 23 now. He's enrolled in university, studying social work and business ethics, taking classes while running the foundation's daily operations. He still wakes early, not because he has to, but because the habit is ingrained. But now those quiet morning hours are spent planning programs, reviewing worker applications, designing systems that give dignity to people society overlooks. His relationship with his father isn't perfect. There are still difficult conversations. Still moments when Kofi looks at Kwame and sees the man who left him. Still nights when Kwame lies awake haunted by guilt for the years he can never give back. But they're building something real. Not trying to recreate what was lost, but creating something new, honest, and meaningful. The mansion has been transformed. Half of it now serves as the foundation headquarters, with the remaining space housing a community center. The marble floors Kofi once scrubbed on his knees now echo with the footsteps of students studying for exams, workers attending skills training, children playing in after-school programs. Grace still runs the kitchen, but now she teaches cooking classes to young people learning job skills. Samuel oversees an urban farming initiative teaching sustainable agriculture. The house that represented isolation and suffering now represents community and hope. Kwame's business empire has been restructured around Kofi's values. Profit is important, but it's measured alongside impact on workers' lives, sustainability, and community benefit. Other businesses mock him for being soft, for caring too much about employees. But his companies are thriving, proving that ethical business and profitability aren't mutually exclusive. Sometimes people ask Kofi if he's forgiven his father. His answer is always honest. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's a choice you make every day. Some days it's easy. Some days I look at him and feel angry all over again for everything I lost. But I choose to move forward because staying angry only punishes me, not him. My father failed me terribly. He also came back, believed me, and committed to doing better. Both things are true. When asked if he's forgiven Naomi, his answer is different. I've released my anger toward her because carrying it was destroying me. But forgiveness requires recognition of harm and genuine remorse. She's never shown either. So I've moved on without forgiving, and I'm at peace with that. Tund, his stepbrother, reached out last year through an intermediary. He wanted to apologize, to explain that he'd been raised to see Kofi as competition rather than family. Kofi met with him once, listened to his apology, and told him honestly, "I don't hate you, but we're not brothers. You had a choice to be kind and chose cruelty. I hope you learn to be better. But that learning doesn't need to involve me." The conversation was short, definitive, and final. Sometimes healing means setting boundaries, not opening doors. On the 3-year anniversary of Kwame's return, father and son stood together in the entrance hall where they'd first seen each other after 15 years apart. The space had been renovated into a gallery, showcasing the foundation's work. Photos of workers who'd been helped, children who'd received education, communities transformed. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" Kwame asked. "You said you didn't know who you were anymore." "I remember," Kofi said. "Do you know now?" Kofi thought for a long moment. "I know I'm someone who survived something that should have destroyed me. I know I'm someone who chooses compassion over bitterness. I know I'm someone who understands that suffering, while terrible, can teach you things comfort never will. And I know I'm someone who's determined to use what I learned to help others." He paused, then added, "I also know I'm still figuring it out. And that's okay." Kwame nodded. "I'm proud of you. Not because of what you've accomplished, though that's remarkable, but because of who you've become despite everything. You're a better man than I ever was." "That's not true," Kofi said. "You're learning. You're choosing to be present. You're using your resources for good. That's all any of us can do. Learn and choose to do better." They stood in comfortable silence, watching students and workers move through the building. Their building, this place that had once represented everything wrong with wealth, and now represented hope for doing better. "Can I ask you something?" Kwame said. "If you could go back, if you could prevent all of this from happening, would you?" Kofi didn't answer immediately. He thought about the 11 years of suffering, the stolen childhood, the loneliness and pain. But he also thought about what he'd learned, about the person he'd become, about the work he was doing now that came directly from understanding what it meant to be powerless. "That's an unfair question," he finally said, "because the person who would make that choice isn't the same person those experiences created. I can't wish away what made me who I am, even if who I am came from terrible things." He turned to look at his father. "But I can say this, I wish you'd been there. I wish I'd had a father who was present. I wish we'd had those 15 years together. Not because it would have prevented my suffering, but because we would have had each other. That's what I mourn. Not who I became, but what we lost." Kwame felt tears sting his eyes. "I mourn that too. Every single day." The impact of Kofi and Kwame's story spread far beyond their immediate work. Their press conference, their honest conversation about failure and healing, resonated across Africa and beyond. Fathers who'd been absent reached out to their children. Business owners examined how they treated their workers. Families trapped in toxic dynamics found courage to speak truth. The story became a catalyst for conversations about wealth, responsibility, family, and what truly matters. A documentary filmmaker approached them about telling their story. At first, Kofi was reluctant. "I don't want to be defined by what happened to me," he said. "I want to be defined by what I'm building now." But Kwame saw it differently. "Your story isn't about being a victim. It's about being a survivor who chose to transform suffering into service." People need to hear that. Not because it's inspirational, but because it's real. They agreed, with one condition. The documentary would include the workers' perspectives. Grace, Samuel, and others would tell their own stories about the impossible position they'd been put in, about the guilt they carried, about their own journeys toward healing. When the documentary premiered, it sparked a movement across African countries. Workers began organizing, demanding better treatment. Children in wealthy families found courage to speak about neglect and emotional abuse. Stepmothers and second wives, facing impossible expectations, shared their own struggles. The conversation became nuanced and complex, moving beyond simple narratives of good and evil to explore the systemic issues that enabled Kofi's suffering. Polygamy without proper legal protections. Cultural pressures that prioritized appearances over well-being. Economic structures that made workers too afraid to protect children. The valorization of absent fathers as providers while ignoring emotional abandonment. Kofi found himself becoming a voice for a generation tired of traditional expectations that caused harm. He spoke at universities, community centers, and international conferences. He talked about dignity, about the difference between discipline and abuse, about how true strength includes vulnerability. Some traditionalists criticized him for undermining African values. Kofi's response was always measured. I'm not against tradition. I'm against using tradition to justify cruelty. Our ancestors valued community, compassion, and protecting children. Those are the traditions I choose to honor. 4 years after Kwame's return, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived at the foundation, forwarded through several channels, from Naomi. She was dying. Liver cancer, stage 4. She had months, maybe weeks left. She wanted to see Kofi. Not to ask for forgiveness, the letter said, but to tell him something important before she died. Kofi held the letter for 3 days before deciding. Part of him wanted to ignore it, to let Naomi face her end without the closure she was seeking. But another part of him, the part that had learned empathy through suffering, knew he'd regret not going. He traveled to Abuja with his father. They found Naomi in a small apartment, thin and frail, barely recognizable as the elegant woman who'd once ruled Lagos social circles. Tund was there, caring for his mother with obvious exhaustion and resignation. Naomi looked at Kofi with clear eyes, no longer clouded by ambition or jealousy. You came, she said weakly. I came, Kofi confirmed, sitting across from her. What did you want to tell me? What followed was 3 hours of painful honesty. Naomi told him about her own childhood, about being the unwanted daughter of a prominent family, about learning early that her worth was tied to the men she could attract and the status she could maintain. She talked about her first marriage to Tun's father, a man who'd abused her and abandoned them both. She talked about the desperation she'd felt when she met Kwame, seeing him as her chance to finally have security and respect. When I saw how much Kwame loved you, she said, her voice barely a whisper, I didn't see a child. I saw competition. I saw a threat to the only security I'd ever had. So I eliminated the threat. I told myself I was teaching you discipline, that I was doing what needed to be done. But the truth is simpler and uglier. I was jealous of a child. Jealous that you had your father's love effortlessly while I had to perform constantly to earn scraps of affection. She coughed, and Tund helped her sip water. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I needed you to know that what I did wasn't about you. You were an innocent child who deserved love and protection. What happened was about my own brokenness, my own fear, my own cruelty. You didn't deserve any of it. Kofi sat in silence, processing. This wasn't the apology he'd imagined, full of excuses and justifications. This was raw acknowledgement of harm done. Why now? He finally asked. Why tell me this now, when you're dying? Naomi smiled sadly. Because dying strips away all the pretense, all the lies we tell ourselves to justify our choices. I'm going to face whatever comes next, and I can't carry these lies with me. I needed you to know the truth. Not for your benefit, though I hope it helps you, but for my own soul. She looked at Kwame, who'd been sitting silently. And you You want to carry all the guilt, but you need to know something. Yes, your absence created the conditions for my abuse. But I made the choice. Every single day, for 11 years, I chose cruelty over compassion. I saw your son suffering, and I chose to continue. That's on me, not you. You failed as a father by being absent. I failed as a human being by being present and choosing evil. Kwame's jaw tightened. That doesn't absolve me. It's not supposed to, Naomi said. But you need to stop thinking you could have prevented a monster you didn't know existed. You couldn't. You should have been there, yes. But I would have found other ways to hurt him, even if you'd been present. Some people are just broken in ways that make them destroy others. They sat together in that small apartment, for people connected by shared history and profound damage. And for the first time, they told the complete truth without defense or deflection. As they prepared to leave, Tun spoke for the first time. I'm sorry too, he said to Kofi. I was a kid, but I was old enough to know what was happening was wrong. I could have spoken up. I chose not to because I benefited from your suffering. I've spent the last 4 years trying to become a better person, but I know that doesn't fix what I did. Kofi looked at his former stepbrother, this man who'd been raised to see him as competition and had played his role in the cruelty. What are you doing now? He asked. I'm a social worker, Tun said. Working with kids in foster care, trying to prevent what happened to you from happening to others. It's my way of trying to balance the scales, though I know they'll never be balanced. Kofi nodded slowly. Keep doing that work. That's the best apology you can offer, not to me, but to the world. Naomi died 3 weeks later. Kofi didn't attend the funeral, but he sent flowers with a card that read, You told the truth at the end. That's more than nothing. By the time Kofi turned 25, the foundation had expanded beyond anyone's initial vision. They were operating in 14 African countries, had helped over 200,000 workers and their families, and had influenced labor law reforms in 6 nations. But Kofi was exhausted. The work was meaningful, but it was consuming his entire life. He woke up thinking about workers' rights and went to bed reviewing program proposals. He had no friends outside of work, no hobbies, no life beyond the mission. Grace noticed first. She found him in the office at midnight, reviewing budgets for the 5th night in a row. Child, she said gently, using the name she'd called him since he was small, you're going to burn yourself out. There's too much to do, Kofi said without looking up. Every day, more people need help. Every day, I hear another story of someone suffering like I did. I can't rest when people are still hurting. Grace sat down across from him. Can I tell you something your mother once told me? Kofi looked up, always hungry for stories about the mother he barely remembered. She said, Grace, I want Kofi to grow up knowing that helping others is important. But I also want him to grow up knowing that he's allowed to be happy. That living a joyful life isn't selfish. That he could do good work and still dance, laugh, love, and rest. Your mother believed that suffering wasn't noble, and that healing meant reclaiming joy, not just surviving. Kofi felt something crack open in his chest. He realized he'd spent so long fighting against suffering that he'd forgotten how to simply live. I don't know how to rest, he admitted. I don't know how to just be happy without feeling guilty. Then learn, Grace said firmly. Your mother would want that for you. Your father wants that for you. And the people you're helping, they don't need a martyr. They need someone who shows them that life after suffering can include joy. That conversation changed something fundamental in Kofi. He started setting boundaries, delegating more, building a team of people who shared the vision and could carry the work forward. He enrolled in a painting class, something he'd always been curious about. He joined a football league with other young professionals. He started dating, tentatively exploring relationships. He discovered he could do meaningful work and also have a life. That these things weren't mutually exclusive. That modeling balance was perhaps more important than modeling endless sacrifice. Kwame watched his son's transformation with relief and pride. He'd been worried about Kofi's intensity, about the way he seemed to be punishing himself by never resting. Seeing him laugh during football matches, seeing him excited about a painting he'd finished, seeing him hold hands with a young woman he was dating, these moments felt like victories more significant than any business success Kwame had ever achieved. At 27, Kofi met Amara. She was a lawyer specializing in labor rights, fierce and brilliant, who'd grown up in a working-class family in Kenya. She understood injustice from lived experience, and she challenged Kofi in ways that made him better. Their relationship was built on shared values and mutual respect. Amara saw all of Kofi, the trauma and the healing, the strength and the vulnerability, and loved him without trying to fix or save him. When Kofi introduced her to his father, Kwame saw something he'd never seen in his son before: complete ease. Kofi laughed freely with Amara, teased her, let himself be teased. He wasn't performing or protecting. He was just being. She's good for him, Grace observed, watching them together at a foundation event. She reminds him that he's allowed to be more than his trauma. Kwame agreed. She reminds him that he's allowed to be happy. 2 years later, Kofi and Amara married in a ceremony that reflected their values. It wasn't the elaborate society wedding that Kwame's status could have afforded. It was a community celebration held at the foundation, attended by workers they'd helped, staff who'd become family, and a small group of close friends. Grace and Samuel walked Kofi down the aisle together, the two people who'd shown him kindness when kindness was rarest. It was a deliberate choice, honoring the family he'd chosen when his biological family had failed him. During his vows, Kofi said something that made everyone weep. Amara, you taught me that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to hold the painful past and the joyful present at the same time. You taught me that I can honor where I've been while building something new. You taught me that love doesn't require perfect people, just honest ones. I promise to be honest with you always, to grow with you, to build a life that includes both purpose and joy. Kwame, watching his son marry, felt the weight of everything he'd missed, every milestone he'd been absent for, and everything they'd rebuilt together. It wasn't the relationship they would have had if he'd been present from the beginning. But it was real, hard-won, and precious. At 30, Kofi became a father. He and Amara had a daughter they named Abina after his mother. Holding his infant daughter for the first time, Kofi felt terror and wonder in equal measure. I don't know how to be a father, he admitted to Kwame. I don't have good models. I don't know what normal parenting looks like. Kwame, now in his 60s, smiled sadly. Neither did I, and I failed catastrophically. But I can tell you what I learned. Presence matters more than perfection. Show up. Be there. Listen more than you lecture. And when you fail, because you will fail, admit it and apologize and do better. What if I mess her up? Kofi asked, looking down at his sleeping daughter. What if my trauma affects how I parent? It will, Kwame said honestly. Trauma lives in us and influences us even after we've healed. But awareness is powerful. You know what absence feels like, so you'll fight to be present. You know what emotional neglect feels like, so you'll fight to be attentive. Your pain will make you a more conscious parent, even when it's hard. Kofi thought about his mother's letter, the one Samuel had given him all those years ago. The words she'd written about his worth, about his value, simply existing. He looked at his daughter and made a silent promise. She would never doubt that she was loved, seen, and valued exactly as she was. Being a father changed Kofi's relationship with his own father. He understood now, in ways he couldn't before, the fear and uncertainty of raising a human being. He understood the temptation to believe that providing financially was the same as providing emotionally. He understood how easy it was to get distracted by work and convince yourself that you were doing it for the family. I understand you better now, Kofi told Kwame one afternoon, watching his father play with baby Abina. I don't excuse what you did, but I understand how it happened. How you convince yourself that building wealth was building a future for me. How easy it is to prioritize the wrong things. Understanding doesn't require excusing, Kwame said. You can understand my failures and still hold me accountable for them. Both things can be true. This was the hard-won wisdom they'd both learned. Complexity exists. People can fail catastrophically and still have value. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Healing doesn't mean the pain disappears. And sometimes the strongest families are the ones that broke and chose to rebuild differently. When Abina was 2 years old, something unexpected happened. A young woman showed up at the foundation asking to speak with Kofi. She was 19, thin and nervous, with eyes that carried too much weight for her age. Her name was Chinyu, and she'd been working as a housemaid for a wealthy family in Abuja. She'd been treated terribly, overworked, underpaid, denied education. But she heard about Kofi's story, about the foundation, about second chances. "I heard you understand," she said quietly. "I heard you lived it, so I thought maybe you could help me." Kofi sat with her for 3 hours, listening to her story. It wasn't identical to his, but the themes were familiar: exploitation, invisibility, stolen opportunities. When she finished, he didn't just offer her help. He offered her a position at the foundation, working in their outreach program while attending university on a full scholarship they provide. "Why?" Chinyu asked, tears streaming down her face. "Why would you do this for me?" "Because someone did it for me," Kofi said simply. "Because Grace and Samuel showed me kindness when they didn't have to. Because my father came home and believed me. Because healing isn't complete until you pass it forward." Chinyu became the first of many. Young people who'd been exploited, overlooked, or abused found their way to the foundation. Some came for job training, others for education, still others just for someone to see them and acknowledge their worth. Kofi met with as many as he could, sharing his story when it helped, listening when that was more important. He discovered that telling his story over and over was part of his healing. Each time he shared what happened, he reclaimed another piece of his power. Each time someone told him his story gave them hope, he transformed his suffering into purpose. 10 years after Kwame's return, the foundation celebrated a major milestone. They'd helped their 1 millionth beneficiary, a single mother in Tanzania who'd received business training and microloan support to start her own tailoring shop. At the celebration, Kofi gave a speech that captured everything he'd learned. "People often ask me how I survived 11 years of abuse and neglect. They want a simple answer, some secret to resilience, some technique they can apply to their own suffering. But the truth is, there's no formula. There's just the choice to keep going when giving up would be easier. I survived because a few people showed me kindness when they could have looked away. I survived because I refused to let my circumstances define my worth. I survived because I held onto the memory of my mother's love, even when it felt like everything else was lost." But survival isn't the end goal. Survival is just the beginning. What matters is what you do after you survive. Do you let bitterness consume you? Or do you transform pain into purpose? I spent years being invisible. Now I spend my days making sure others are seen. I spent years being told I was worthless. Now I spend my days reminding people of their inherent value. I spent years being denied education. Now I spend my days ensuring others have access to knowledge. This isn't about being inspirational. This is about being intentional. About choosing every single day to be better than what was done to you. About refusing to let your worst experiences turn you into someone who inflicts similar pain on others. My father failed me terribly. He also came back, admitted his failure, and committed to doing better. That doesn't erase the damage, but it matters. Because healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about building a future that includes both accountability and grace. My stepmother abused me for 11 years. She eventually told the truth about why, but that doesn't undo the harm. I've chosen to release my anger toward her because holding it was destroying me, but I haven't forgotten what she did. Both things are true. I've moved forward without forgiving her, and I'm at peace with that choice. Life is complicated. People are complicated. Healing is complicated. Anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. What I can tell you is this. You are more than what happened to you. You are more than your trauma. You are more than your circumstances. Your worth is inherent, not earned. And if you're surviving right now, if you're holding on by your fingernails, that's enough. That's everything. Just keep holding on. The story isn't over yet. The crowd erupted in applause, but Kofi barely heard it. He was looking at his father, his wife, his daughter, the staff who'd become family. He was looking at Grace, now elderly but still sharp, who'd first shown him that kindness was possible even in impossible situations. He was looking at the hundreds of people in the room who'd been helped by the foundation, who'd reclaim their lives and dignity. This was the answer to the question people always asked: how did you survive? He survived by refusing to survive alone, by building a community of survivors who held each other up, by transforming his private pain into collective healing. Kofi is now 35 years old. His daughter Abina is 5, joined by a son named Kwame Jr., age 3. He continues to run the foundation alongside his wife, though they've built a strong leadership team that allows them to take actual vacations and be present for their children. Kwame, now 70, has officially retired from active business management. He spends his days as a grandfather, teaching Abina to read and taking Kwame Jr. to the park. The time he denied his own son, he gives freely to his grandchildren, and in their laughter, he finds a measure of redemption. The relationship between father and son is still complex. There are still moments of tension, still conversations that touch old wounds. But they've learned to navigate the complexity with honesty and patience. Do you ever regret it? Kwame asked his son recently. Do you ever wish you'd had a normal childhood, a present father, a life without all that pain? Kofi thought carefully before answering. I regret that we lost those years together. I regret that I suffered unnecessarily. I regret that you weren't there. But I don't regret who I became. And I don't know if I could have become this person without surviving that. So I hold both truths. The past was terrible, and it made me who I am. I'm mourning what was lost, and I'm grateful for what was found. He paused, then added, but I'll tell you what I don't do. I don't romanticize suffering. I don't tell my children that pain builds character or that struggle makes you stronger. Because that's not always true. Sometimes suffering just destroys people. I was lucky. I had small kindnesses that kept me human. I had resilience I didn't know I possessed. But not everyone has that. So we build systems that prevent suffering rather than expecting people to survive it. This wisdom, hard-won and deeply felt, guides everything the foundation does. They don't just help people survive exploitation. They work to end the exploitation itself. They don't just treat symptoms. They address root causes. And it's working. Labor laws have changed across multiple countries. Corporate practices have shifted. The conversation about workers' dignity has moved from radical to mainstream. One family's trauma, honestly shared and intentionally transformed, created ripples that became waves. So what do we take from Kofi and Kwame's story? First, that absence is a form of abandonment, even when it's motivated by good intentions. Being a provider isn't enough if you're not also being present. No amount of money compensates for emotional neglect. Second, that people can fail catastrophically and still deserve the opportunity to do better. Kwame abandoned his son and enabled abuse through his absence. That's unforgivable in the abstract. But he also came back, believed Kofi, took responsibility, and spent years rebuilding trust. Both truths exist simultaneously. Third, that forgiveness is not required for healing. Kofi moved forward without forgiving his stepmother. He released his anger without excusing her actions. That's valid. We don't owe forgiveness to people who harm us, especially when they don't show genuine remorse. Fourth, that surviving trauma doesn't obligate you to do anything with it. Kofi chose to transform his pain into purpose, but that was his choice. Other survivors have different paths, and all of them are valid. You don't have to become an advocate or activist or inspiration. You're allowed to just heal and live. Fifth, that systemic problems require systemic solutions. Kofi's abuse was possible because of power imbalances, economic desperation, and cultural patterns that enabled exploitation. Individual healing is important, but so is changing the systems that create trauma. Finally, that healing is possible, but it's not linear or complete. Kofi still carries scars. His relationship with his father is better, but not perfect. He's built a beautiful life, but he still has hard days. That's real healing, not the fairy tale version, but the messy, ongoing, complicated version.